Hey everybody, good morning. I'm WBTV First Alert Meteorologist Eric Garlick alongside Chief Meteorologist Al Conklin.
Good morning. Morning, Eric.
Another edition of the First Alert. This just kind of gives us a big topic to talk about and dive into and really explain it to you guys in a way that we can explain it and just kind of regurgitate that information.
And, you know, we don't oftentimes get as much time on TV to dig into these details. So today we're going to focus on the tropics. Number one, typically now, as we're approaching the middle, well, really September 10th is the peak of hurricane season. So we're quickly approaching the peak. And there have historically been some really bad storms this time of the year. But on the flip side, it's really quiet.
It's really quiet right now, and it might not stay that way. Expecting things to change at the end of September, and as we head into October, you know, hurricane season's far from over. We might be at the peak, but it is far from over.
Right, we're only in the middle right now. It runs through the end of November, so we have a lot of time. But as we said, there have been a lot of hurricanes this time of the year that have impacted both North and South Carolina. And we're going to focus on a couple of those and look back a little bit.
Yeah, let's talk about one of those storms right now and talk about where this all happened and when it all happened. So you got Hurricane Fran and Hurricane Bertha. You know, both of these developed off the Atlantic, off the coast of Africa, moved through the Atlantic and moved up the east coast of Florida and moved right toward us. So let's talk about those paths and what these storms did as they moved over the area. So you have Hurricane Bertha that moved through. It was a Category 1 at landfall. That made landfall July 12th, 1996. So 28 years ago, and this was kind of the predecessor for Hurricane Fran that moved in later.
Yeah, and what I remember about both of these storms, a couple of things. Number one is that even though Bertha was a July storm, it was basically a Cape Verde storm that you would see much later in the season. So it was interesting that it started so far out into the Atlantic, and it was briefly Category 2. These were both big rainmakers, particularly Fran. Fran was 28 years ago today when it came up through Raleigh, and that was a terrible storm. And it's still, a lot of folks in the Raleigh area still talk about it, but really it was all across central and eastern North Carolina where with many, many power outages. Most of the piers along the beaches of North Carolina went down between one or both of these. And if Bertha knocked down part of it, Fran took care of the rest of it. And where these intersected was just around the Wilmington area, Cape Fear region. My wife's family is all from eastern North Carolina, and I remember actually being on WBTV with then Chief Meteorologist Eric Thomas. We actually had my mother-in-law on the phone with us because the water was coming up through the drains during Fran. It was really, I mean, it was just a lot of wind. They had wind gusts over 100 miles per hour. So this time of the year, you could get some really intense storms here in North Carolina, and this is certainly two of them. And this was a back-to-back hit. And Eric and I were talking briefly before we came out here to do this. This really started a resurgence of tropical storm activity or tropical activity for the eastern part of the Carolinas. After this, it wasn't shortly thereafter, we had Bonnie, we had Floyd, which was a hurricane of record that really replaced, back in 1954, Hazel, which was the historical record for North Carolina. But these just kind of, that whole period just really erased all this. And since then, of course, we've had Matthew and Florence, but more recently with devastating impacts.
Yeah, so with Hurricane Bertha, we were kind of, you know, digging into the numbers. You were here for it. You know, I was not able to be here for it. But, you know, Hurricane Bertha, when it came through, it dumped, 5 to 10 inches of rain. Big story with that was the winds off the coast. Some measurements, 108, 116 miles per hour along some of the piers. Not a terrible storm when it came to rain.
Because it was moving so fast, Eric. I remember
the winds
that.
were strong.
The winds were very strong, and frying pan shoals off of the coast of Wilmington we show that tower sometimes out there. It's got a flag on. It's privately owned right now. And you can actually go out there and stay out there. They had measured seas up to 28 feet and wind gusts to 116. And Jacksonville in eastern North Carolina, over there where Camp Lejeune is, 108 at the Marine Corps Air Station. So again, really strong winds. So
and that was the weaker of the two storms.
That was the weaker of the two storms, but it was a faster moving storm. And I think the seas were much rougher with that one. It took down most of the piers from the North-South Carolina border all the way up through Cape Lookout. Almost every pier was down. Yeah, so
pretty impressive storm, but then
a lot of folks talk about that, because they said the insurance on the piers, they all remember Bertha. It took down all the fishing piers. Then you had to deal with Fran about 7 weeks later, and the insurance companies were asking, well, damage at your home, is it from this storm or that storm? Because they really almost just crisscross as your graphic points there.
Yeah, and we're live on Facebook, so if you have any comments, if you remember those storms, have a memory from those storms you want to share, throw them in the comments, and we'll read it and share it out loud. So that was Bertha that came through, and then Fran came through, slower moving system, stronger storm. We know slow moving, strong storms produce very big storm surges and a lot of heavy rainfall. So rainfall totals, 15, 20 inches versus the 5 to 10, on top of the 5 to 10 on already damaged things from Bertha. Just a recipe for a very, very bad situation as Hurricane Fran came through.
And Fran was a Category 3, a major hurricane. It was the first major hurricane strike in the state of North Carolina in quite some time. And because it was a slower moving system, it put down more rain. There was at least 15 inches of rain in the Cape Fear area, and even up into Virginia, there was over 16 inches of rain. So, and when you think about it, you had one hurricane came through with 5 to 10 inches of rain, and then 6 weeks later you have another one that comes in with even more rain. So there was tremendous flooding in the eastern and central part of the state. Again, in Charlotte, there was some rain out of this, especially east of I-77. I remember it, but for the most part, these kind of spared us. Raleigh was really hard hit, though.
Yeah, you want to be on the left side of the storm if it's moving through the area most times, and Raleigh on the right side of the storms, you had tornadoes, the heaviest rainfall and the strongest winds and the storm surge all on the right side of the storm, northeast quadrant of the storm. So yeah, definitely not something you want to see coming your way.
And as I recall, Fran was a $5 billion storm. The name was retired. There will never be another Hurricane Fran. There was a lot of deaths in the Caribbean. We had many, many deaths in the east, including here in North Carolina, up into Virginia, and all the way up through other parts north. But so it was retired. So we will never have another Hugo. We will never have another Fran for that very reason. Really, historically strong storms, and Fran 28 years ago today. Now, on the flip side, things are still fairly quiet in the tropics, though, right now, Eric.
Yeah, so, there's those storms moving off to the north and east. But, we're entering peak season. We expect a lot of activity to be going on in the tropics right now. September 10th, the actual peak. And there's a lot of yellow on this map. And don't get me wrong, there is tropical activity. But, in terms of a hurricane developing or a new named storm, relatively speaking, it is low, anywhere from 10 to 30% chance across any of these given areas for some development. So you got 2 in the Western Gulf, 2 in the Western Atlantic, and then as we widen out, you got 1 more off the coast of Africa. So a lot of activity, but not expecting much to develop out of this, at least in the next 7 days.
Well, when I look at your scale there at the top right, you've got yellow is low, red is high. Well, we don't have anything that is eye-opening right now. Very interesting. There's a lot of activity, but nothing that is on the verge of becoming anything named, and that's good news, I suppose. Again, there aren't going to be any impacts here in the United States. However, there are some large swells with that thing off of the mid-Atlantic coast. There has been some coastal flooding in Virginia and eastern North Carolina, but that's about it. So again, a lot of activity, but nothing on the verge of becoming anything.
Some heavy rain in Texas and Louisiana as well. With that little system that's trying to get going there, we could see some of that moisture being pushed in as we head into the weekend, at least into South Carolina. And we'll have some small rain chances here in the Charlotte area, but anything substantial and anything tropical, really not expecting that as we head through the next week. So bottom line, we'll continue to monitor it, expecting it to become more active late September when we start to see things churning. So talking a little bit more why it's quiet, Al, and we've been diving into this over the last couple of weeks. One of the big culprits is the monsoon season in Africa is shifted more toward the equator than it usually is. And when they come off the coast in northern Africa versus middle of Africa, the water temperatures are cooler, so it helps limit the development of those tropical waves, and they just kind of fizzle out as they push west into the Atlantic.
Yeah, we always talk about the domino effects. That's locally, but it's also on a global scale. And so there's what we call teleconnections to all of this. So you say, well, wait a minute. Just because it's raining in such and such part of Africa, why does that mean, that doesn't have any impact here? Well, yes, it does, because it does, for the very reasons you just pointed out, is where these storms emanating from? Where are they coming off of the coast of Africa? It makes a difference because the currents there have colder water versus warmer water closer to the equator. And so these things are already moving into a less, not unfavorable, but a less favorable position. Yep. It's not hostile, but it's not favorable. So right from the get-go, they're struggling. Sometimes you see them come off, and within a day you go, oh boy, that thing is looking like it's ready to roll, and it's got, all this open, warm water. But right now, that's not what we're seeing.
And if that was the only thing that they had to overcome, it might be able to overcome it. But you also have some warm air in the upper levels of the atmosphere that inhibit the lift and the development of these storms that come off the coast. And then wind shear is also a factor. So got some high wind shear off the coast of Africa that's kind of helping push those monsoon season storms to the northern parts of the continent. And there's places in the Sahara that are seeing rain that don't see rain in August and July at all, even into September.
Right. So and so what happens when these storms form and the winds are coming across them, they're blowing off the top. So again, a hurricane, we talk about Category 5 hurricane being, oh man, it's at a perfect environment. These things are fickle. They have to want it. They can overcome some things, but when you start lumping on all of these, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. There's not one thing that's preventing it from going, but when you start lumping on 3, 4, 5 different, sort of hostile attributes, the shear is just blowing the tops off. So these things are trying to develop, and well, there goes the energy.
They're hitting the warm air, and it's not climbing through it.
We're already over cold water. They just aren't. So I don't know that anybody is going to cry that we're not getting a lot of hurricanes. I'm sure a lot of folks are happy about that, especially the insurance industry. But again, warning. We're only in September. We're at the peak of hurricane season. It was active going up. It could be very active going down. Right now, it's not very active, but that doesn't mean that it can't be later in the month, and certainly during the months of October and November. Historically, we have had massive storms, especially in October. And I think of Michael, a couple of years ago, Category 5, one of the strongest storms to ever hit the United States. So don't turn your back yet.
And climatologists are, forecasting that we're going to start to see a shift to La Nina, which means there's going to be warmer water and less wind shear out over the Atlantic. So as we kind of transition into that, becoming more favorable for hurricane development. So bottom line, we'll continue to watch it, but things are pretty quiet for now. Let's kind of transition into, what we're going to see coming forward. Next named storm will be Francine, and then Gordon, and then eventually as we head toward the H's and I's and J's. We'll see if we make it that far. We got a lot of time yet, but
hopefully don't get to Tony and Sarah and down there, but so, all right, so what about locally here, Eric? You mentioned a little bit about, some of these systems down along the Gulf Coast. None of them terribly active. These are all sort of weak, low-pressure systems. They've been keeping, it's very active weather along the Gulf Coast region and just offshore of the Carolinas. And they just seem like they're a little bit far out of reach to bring us really appreciable rain.
Yeah, little low-pressure systems or tropical waves developing in the western Gulf and pushing inland, bringing some of that moisture into Alabama, Georgia, and into South Carolina. But if you look at the green where the rain is, it's not making it too close to Charlotte. And then we're going to have a cold front come through Saturday, and that's going to open the door to some much drier and nicer fall-like air once again as we head into next week. So a lot of rain showing up to the south of us, not quite making it here. 20% chance of rain Friday, 40% chance on Saturday. We had first alerts throughout the week. It was looking like one of those systems might beat that high pressure in terms of making it here, but it looks like the high pressure is going to get here and win out, pushing that moisture off to the south. So we dropped the first alert.
Yeah, there's a possibility that most of the rain will be along and south and east of I-85, and primarily Friday night into early Saturday. Now, Saturday afternoon, some of the model guidance suggested if we clear out and with that new front coming in from the north and west, there could be a couple of spotty showers that develop, but again, they look like they'll be just that, spotty. So overall, a 40% chance of rain on Saturday. That's not a lot. So there you can see where's most of the green. It is on the map south and east of I-85, and this is going from basically 5 in the afternoon on Friday through Friday night. So some of those football games, those high school games in places like Wadesboro and Chesterfield and down towards Richmond, Lancaster, you may run into a little bit of rain tomorrow night, but if you're north and west, more than likely not too much. And then as that secondary front comes in from the north and west, we may have just enough break in the cloud cover and just enough leftover moisture that we could squeeze out 1 or 2 showers here across the Piedmont Saturday afternoon. Again, no, I don't think it's widespread. It's not first alert worthy, so we've gone ahead and dropped that. by and large, most hours of the weekend are likely going to be dry.
Yeah, so that's really the only blemish on the forecast. Football Friday night, again, depending on where you are, might see a rain shower or two pushing through the area. No lightning expected with this. Not expecting them to cancel any of the games
so
because of what we're seeing.
More clouds than anything, and temperatures will be comfortable in the 70s. Not too hot, not too cool.
Yep, and then as we head into the weekend, going to be a lot different than what we had last weekend. We had some 90s, and we'll see temperatures hovering in the upper 70s, the low 80s over the next few days. We had that 99 last Thursday, and as we go through the next week or so, expecting those temperatures to climb up into the low 80s, still below average. 79 on Sunday, 81 Monday. Cool overnight low is going to be the story as we head toward next week, with temps dipping down into the 50s. We haven't had a lot of 90-degree temperature days lately, but I had that stretch of 5 or 6 last week, putting us at least one on the board for September. Not seeing too many 90s the rest of the month, though.
No, so we may wind up with, topping out at 45, which is basically right at average. Now, granted, a lot of days were in the mid and even upper 90s this summer, especially in July and then in the middle part of or late in August. But we had a fair share where it was at 90 or 91, not really much above normal. But again, we may wind up, even with the slow start, we didn't have our first 90-degree reading here until July 13th. That's a slow start. But even with that, we may wind up just about average. Last year we had 49, this year so far 45. Again, we may get a handful here before the summer is over with, but not looking like a lot.
Yeah, our average temperature is really going to take a dive as we head through the month. We covered this yesterday, down to 79 by the end of the month for average highs, so things pretty quiet. So if you want to reach out, we cover, we do the first alert every Thursday at 8 a.m., but we also do these every morning. If you have any questions, comments, a topic you want us to look into and explain a little bit more, reach out to us on the socials. Al's on Facebook and Twitter, or X. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and X as well. So reach out to us. If you're not on socials, feel free to shoot us an email as well. We'll be able to answer any of those questions.
Yep. All right. And we're going to leave you with a quick look at your 7-day forecast so you can make your outdoor plans. 80 degrees for today and tomorrow. And then, as Eric mentioned, we'll probably bump up a little bit lower, maybe middle 80s, but more likely lower 80s on Saturday. Sunday, I don't think Charlotte gets quite to 80. Most of us will wind up in the 70s. And then next week, ideal. Lower 80s, just a smidge below normal by day, but much lower than normal at night. The normal low now about 66, and we are definitely looking at probably, readings anywhere from 6 to 10 degrees below normal next week. So if you like that fall weather, guess what? We got it for you.
And some very low humidity with that as well. All right, thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.